It was concealed with intent, hidden beneath Boston's cobblestones and a century and a half of sworn silence. Nobody was ever meant to uncover this tale, the official records destroyed in flames, the witnesses gone without trace, the Beacon Hill house where everything occurred, demolished in the dead of night, every brick crushed to powder and thrown into the harbor. They wanted it wiped away from memory, from history itself. Yet certain truths, they take root. They seep through the soil of time, staining the present with questions never meant to surface. And the central question, the one that haunted a few to their graves, is simple, terrifying. What became of the Callahan sisters, Ara and Isolde? In the spring of 1871, they were 16 and 17, the radiant daughters of a shipping tycoon admired for their wit and almost unearthly beauty. In the winter of 1891, 2 decades later, they were still 16 and 17. Not just outwardly, but in every biological sense. They never aged, not a single day. And the truth of why, it wasn't a blessing. It was a bargain, a dreadful pact forged in the shadows of America's proudest city. How did this vanish from the record? How could something so impossible, so vital to our grasp of life and death, simply be buried? The answer is darker than the riddle itself, for it hints that the world you believe in is a carefully staged illusion. Behind that curtain exist powers that bend the very laws of nature to serve themselves. This isn't only about 2 girls frozen in time. It's about what was taken from them, and from us, to guard their secret. It's about a force so immense it has molded the world we know today, and you are blind to it. Until now. This story found its way to me. A leather-bound trunk bought at a dusty estate sale in rural Massachusetts. Inside, not heirlooms but a single wax-sealed journal, the private writings of Dr. Alistair Finch, O. Once a celebrated physician in Boston, later disgraced and confined to an asylum where he died in 1902. His crime, he refused to forget the Callahan sisters. You're not just watching, you're stepping inside. Finch's record begins not with the girls, but their father, Marcus Callahan, who clawed his way from the docks to the top of Boston's elite. He was ruthless, brilliant, and, as Finch claimed, possessed by a consuming dread, the fear of loss. His wife had died suddenly of fever, and it shattered him. He grew obsessed with preservation, with permanence. He poured his fortune into experimental medicine, into strange new ideas drifting out of Europe. Finch wrote he was a man who would bargain with any devil to keep what was his. In 1871, his daughters were everything. Ilara, the elder, sharp and curious. Isolde, the artist, gentle and observant. They were his life's treasures, but also delicate. A cough, a chill, the slightest illness sent Marcus spiraling. He kept them in a gilded cage, shielded from the world. Finch, as family doctor, described his rising unease. He saw 2 vibrant young women being slowly suffocated by a father's devotion, a love twisting into possession, into desperation. Then, in May of 1871, both sisters fell ill with the same wasting fever that had claimed their mother. Finch's journal turns frantic. He describes Marcus Callahan unraveling, refusing the diagnosis, locking Finch out of their chambers for days. When Finch was finally readmitted, the girls were changed. The fever gone, the weakness erased. They were radiant, more alive than before, but in their eyes lingered a stillness, an eerie calm no survivor of death should wear. Marcus called it divine. He dismissed Finch with a final generous payment. Yet Finch couldn't shake the sense he hadn't seen a recovery. He had witnessed an exchange. Something had been taken and something else, unnatural, brought inside. He wrote, "I saw not the flush of health on their cheeks, but the cold sheen of porcelain." For the next 5 years, Finch observed from afar, the sisters became icons of Boston society, yet never belonged. They were showcases, perfectly preserved, always smiling, their laughter never reaching their eyes. They hosted salons, attended grand balls, but their words were echoes from years past. Opinions unchanged, jokes repeated. It was as though their minds, like their bodies, were frozen in amber. Beautiful dolls moved by memory. The rumors began by 1876. At first, idle whispers. How the Callahan girls never seemed to age, how their fashions lagged years behind. But gossip in Boston is slow, relentless. Childhood friends married, raised families, bore the marks of time. Not Ara and Isalda, they stayed flawless. One Forgotten Society column recorded, "To see the Callahan sisters is to see a photograph breathe, a moment of the past held permanent. One wonders if Mr. Callahan's devotion is a blessing or a taxidermist's art." The chilling remark proved more accurate than its writer imagined. Finch, now obsessed, began his private inquiry. Using contacts, he tracked down former servants of the Callahan estate. Most stayed silent, pensions buying loyalty, but one, a young maid named Clara, dismissed abruptly, agreed to speak in secret. She told of a man who visited during the girl's illness. A man, not a physician. He arrived at night in a crestless carriage. She described him as tall, gaunt, with eyes that never blinked. He carried a locked iron case and spoke with Marcus Callahan for hours behind closed doors. Afterward, the house grew cold and never warmed again. She said the sisters, after recovery, sometimes froze. They would stand in corridors or sit in silence for an hour, unmoving, as if waiting for a signal. Clara's words ignited Finch's suspicions. The unblinking man, the iron chest. This was no miracle. This was a procedure. He plunged into Boston's hidden underworld, among occultists, frauds, and back-alley physicians serving the desperate wealthy. He searched for whispers of men who offered permanence. His journal from this time is a descent into shadows. He writes of secret auctions where forbidden manuscripts were sold for fortunes, of murmurs about a cabal of Boston's most powerful men, industrialists, judges, academics, who sought to master not commerce but natural law itself. They named themselves the Stygian Fellowship. Their aim was nothing less than halting time. It sounded insane, the ravings of a mourning man. But Finch was thorough. He cross-checked names, dates, financial accounts. He uncovered that a small elite circle, Marcus Callahan among them, had been channeling immense sums into a front called the Boston Society for Chronological Study. On the surface, it looked like a respectable scholarly club devoted to history and preservation. Yet Finch suspected its real mission was far darker. He believed they weren't merely researching time, they were striving to bend it. He saw a disturbing pattern. Every man in this circle had endured a devastating loss, most often a wife or child. They were bound not by greed, but by a collective, pathological dread of death, and they would pay any price, commit any sin to defy it. He wrote, "They speak of progress and enlightenment, yet their road leads to the oldest, blackest sorcery. They seek divine power, but carry the hearts of terrified children, willing to sacrifice anything or anyone to keep their toys from breaking. Truly, what would you do with that kind of power? If you could freeze a perfect instant, a flawless person, and keep them forever, the temptation would be overwhelming and the cost unthinkable." By 1881, 10 full years had passed since the sisters' miraculous recovery. They were now women in their late 20s, yet still looked like girls. The illusion began to collapse. Dead. What had once been a curiosity was turning into a grotesque spectacle. Society, which once adored them, now recoiled in fascinated dread. Invitations dwindled. The Callahan mansion on Beacon Hill became a nest of rumor and unease. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of two living relics. Finch arranged a meeting with Ara, the elder, under the guise of a social call. He had to see for himself. He describes the encounter with deep sorrow. He found her in the conservatory, surrounded by plants that had lived, died, and been replaced countless times, while she remained unchanged. Her skin, he wrote, held the glow of fine marble, but also its chill. Her eyes were bright, yet the intelligence within was a recording. She spoke of a concert she claimed to have attended last week, but the performance she described occurred in 1872. I asked her of the future, of her dreams. She looked at me with serene, beautiful vacancy and said, "The future is today, Dr. Finch. It is always today." It was the most chilling thing he had ever heard. She wasn't alive, not truly. She was looping, her consciousness trapped in a cycle of memories endlessly repeating. She was a prisoner in her own flawless, unchanging body. The pact her father struck hadn't just halted her aging, it had halted her becoming. As he turned to leave, she slipped a folded scrap of paper into his hand, her calm mask breaking for just a heartbeat, revealing a flash of raw terror in her eyes. "He watches," she whispered, voice brittle as dried leaves. "He always watches." On the note was a single cryptic sketch, a serpent devouring its own tail. But within the circle was a lotus flower, blooming, slowly constricted, a symbol of infinity strangling life and rebirth. It was a message, a plea for help from a soul trapped inside a beautiful, unbreakable cage. The emblem, Ouroboros crushing the lotus, became Finch's fixation. It wasn't a known alchemical or occult sigil, it was unique. It was a key. He spent months in the dusty archives of Boston's libraries combing anciens, texts, hunting for a match. He finally found it in an extremely rare, privately printed book bound in human skin, a manuscript so vile it was only whispered of, Somnus Infinitum, or The Endless Sleep. The book was not about magic in the theatrical sense. It was a kind of proto-scientific manual, a grimoire of biological manipulation. It detailed a process, a transference, where the vital regenerative energy, the bloom of one being, could be harnessed to enforce stasis in another. It didn't bestow immortality, it granted permanence, but the cost was monstrous. To render one permanent, another had to be consumed. The ritual demanded a continual source of life force. It wasn't a single act. It was a subscription, a parasitic bond. The book described creating a vessel, a biological anchor that would siphon vitality from a source and channel it to the subject. The subject would be fixed in unchanging perfection. The vessel would, well, the text was disturbingly vague. It named the vessel only as the Withered Prince. The source, it implied, must be living, brimming with vitality. The drawing from Ara was a diagram. The serpent represented the stasis, the endless loop. The lotus represented the life being consumed. The Callahan sisters weren't merely frozen in time, they were the product of a horrific biological circuit. Their unnatural permanence was fed by the slow, systematic draining of something or someone else. Suddenly, a rash of unexplained disappearances haunting Boston's poorest wards over the past decade took on a sinister new meaning. Young, healthy men and women plucked from the streets, never seen again. The police had no suspects, but Finch now carried a theory too grim to endure. Were these missing people the source? Were their lives the fuel for the sisters' endless youth? This was no miracle. It was a machine of flesh and blood. Finch realized he was standing at the brink of a precipice. This was no longer just about the Callahan sisters. This was about a conspiracy treating human life as a raw material, the Stygian. Fellowship wasn't merely a circle of grieving men, it was a refined, vampiric enterprise. He knew he must find the vessel, the withered prince, the biological engine powering this nightmare. His search led to a private sanatorium on Boston's outskirts, funded by a consortium of hidden benefactors. A roster of names, Finch noted, bore a suspicious likeness to members of the Stygian Fellowship, the Brookline Asylum for the chronically afflicted. It wasn't for the insane, it was for patients with unusual degenerative conditions, or so they claimed. Finch forged a letter of introduction to gain entry, posing as a doctor curious about their innovative treatments. The director, a cold, severe man named Dr. Silas Croft, gave him a tour of the spotless, quiet facility. Everything was pristine, orderly, and profoundly unsettling. The patients were kept in private rooms, their faces hidden behind veiled screens. Croft claimed it was meant to give them dignity. Finch realized it was meant to conceal who they truly were. He succeeded in obtaining a patient record. Within it, he uncovered a name that froze his veins: Thomas Callahan, Marcus Callahan's child, his firstborn son, who was said to have perished from a rare hereditary illness at the age of 10, years before the sisters ever existed. But he had not perished. He had been concealed. He was the vessel. He was the decayed heir. In the stillness of night, Finch slipped the lock of Thomas's chamber. The account in his diary is the material of nightmares. Thomas still lived, if one could call it living. He was ancient, a century old within the shell of a boy. His flesh resembled paper, his limbs shrunken, his breathing a faint rasp. Yet he was bound by an array of strange buzzing mechanisms and crystal tubes filled with a faintly glowing substance, all attached to a central engine in the chamber, an engine that thrummed with a low predatory resonance. And his gaze was awake. They were timeless, aware, and brimming with torment so deep it pressed against the air like a tangible weight. He could not utter words, but his gaze shouted. Finch had uncovered the source. Marcus Callahan had not merely sacrificed outsiders to extend his daughters, he had given up his own son. The terror of the revelation nearly destroyed him. Marcus Callahan had turned his boy into a living conduit, a decayed, forsaken deity sustaining the artificial lives of his flawless sisters. Thomas was the concealed disgrace, the monstrous toll for the family's wonder. His gradual ruin was their endless youth. The glowing substance within the tubes, it could only be the drawn essence of life. The bloom. It was siphoned from Thomas, processed through this thrumming arcane device, and somehow delivered to Ara and his. But in what way? Finch understood he could not remain. Dr. Croft's glance had carried a spark of suspicion. He had to flee, yet he could not depart without evidence. With a small needle he carried, he drew a portion of the glowing substance from one of the tubes. He noticed upon a nearby table beside the bed a silver pendant. He seized it. It was a reckless, senseless act, but he was driven, compelled by instinct. He escaped the asylum, his heart pounding against his chest, the tiny heated vial of substance searing in his pocket. Within his workshop, he analyzed the material under his strongest lens. It defied anything he had witnessed. It was not blood, it was not serum. It was animate, minuscule radiant motes like tiny stars swirled within the liquid, beating with a steady, luminous rhythm. It was unfiltered vitality, raw and pure. It was existence itself, torn from its host. A chilling verse from the Somnist Infinitum echoed in his thoughts. The soul's flame may be poured as one pours fine wine, leaving the recesses. Dew abandoned. He opened the pendant he had taken. Inside lay two miniature likenesses. On one side, a healthy young boy of around 10, Thomas before his corruption. On the other side, a woman Finch did not know. A striking woman with piercing, dark, unyielding eyes. Beneath her image, a small engraving. Lenera, my life, my bloom. Who was Lenera? And why was her portrait inside a pendant in Thomas's chamber? Her name was absent from every Callahan family record. She was another shadow, another fragment of the enigma, suggesting an even deeper, more original crime than the one already revealed. This device had not started with Thomas, it had started with her. Finch's search became a desperate sprint against the clock. He knew the Fellowship would soon uncover his trespass within the asylum. They would pursue him. He had to unveil the full scheme before they silenced him. He summoned his last allies, demanding favors from men indebted to him to investigate Marcus Callahan's history, specifically seeking the name Lenera. The response arrived from an old municipal clerk, a man with a sharp memory and a hatred for Boston's upper class. Lenera was not a lady of society. She was a creator, a gifted self-trained inventor and scientist who, in the 1850s, stood upon the edge of groundbreaking revelations in cell renewal. She had issued preliminary treatises, drawing both praise and condemnation for her audacious theories about manipulating essence. She argued aging was not certain but an error in the cellular script that might be amended. Then in 1858, she disappeared. Her workshop burned in unexplained fire. Her discoveries vanished. The official report declared it a tragic mishap. The clerk confided something else. He said Marcus Callahan, at that time a young, aspiring tycoon, had been her chief patron. He had been enthralled by her, not merely her intellect but her being. He had asked for marriage. She had denied him, determined to remain free, devoted solely to her craft. Soon after her refuse, her laboratory burned and she vanished. Callahan, a few months later, married a socially approved wife, the mother of his heirs. The reality was a cascade of dread. Marcus Callahan had not simply uncovered the omnis infinitum, he had stolen its foundations from Lenera. He had lusted after her brilliance, and when he could not possess her, he seized her work, likely murdering her and incinerating her lab to obscure his theft. The entire Stygian Fellowship, the entire grotesque system of sacrifice, was constructed on the stolen intellect of a woman the world had deliberately erased. This was never just about sustaining his children, it was a heritage of robbery and slaughter. Lenera was the initial casualty. She was the true source, and Finch feared with icy terror that her investigations had been far greater and far more perilous than the somnus infinitum ever implied. The fragments now aligned, shaping a vision of malice so entrenched, so deeply woven into the city's ruling veins, that Finch felt engulfed in hopeless despair. The Callahan daughters were not merely a private tragedy, they embodied a horrific order, a secret fraternity grounded in stolen science and human torment. The Stygian Fellowship did not only safeguard their kin, they wielded this stolen method as the ultimate weapon of dominance. Finch uncovered trails of finances, coercion, and schemes. Men who opposed the Fellowship's aims saw their lives ruined, their kin threatened, courts passed impossible rulings, leaders voted against the common good. The Fellowship's reach spread like a malignancy through the veins of the metropolis. The stasis craft was not only practiced upon children, Finch found rumors of other uses. A rival politician muted not through death, but by being confined in a state of eternal paralysis in a private institution. A rival entrepreneur, his mind frozen just before unveilies. A groundbreaking advance. It was the flawless weapon, a killing without a body, a cell without shackles. Imagine that, the capacity to simply suspend a person, to erase them from the game with no trace of bloodshed. The authority would be absolute. Finch realized he was no longer simply an investigator, he had become a danger to an unseen empire. He began noticing shadows in every corner, figures in grey coats loitering near his flat. His letters were interfered with. Companions suddenly kept their distance, their eyes clouded with dread whenever he drew near. He was being cut off, groomed for disappearance. He concealed his journal, the vial of liquid, and the pendant inside the hidden compartment of the leather chest, entrusting it to the only individual he believed worthy of trust, his estranged brother living in the countryside, with strict orders to unseal it only upon his death. He understood what awaited him. His final diary note before his confinement is barely a whisper. They will insist I am insane. They will wield the instruments of my own trade to disgrace me. They will lock me in a white-walled cell and tell the world I was consumed by delusion. But I am not deranged. I have witnessed the mechanism beneath the garden. I have seen the shriveled deity that powers the eternal angels. The truth rests in this volume. The truth seeps through. Discover it. Avenge us. Avenge Lenra. The sanctioned account of Dr. Alistair Finch's downfall was rapid and sorrowful. The Boston Medical Society issued a notice branding him a risk to himself and his patients, citing a dangerous fixation with fanciful plots and grim illusions. His peers and co-workers testified about his increasingly unstable actions. His relatives, almost certainly under pressure, consented to his commitment. He was wiped away from society as cleanly and efficiently as chalk brushed from a slate. He endured the last decade of his life inside Danvers State Asylum, where records reveal he never uttered another word. He only sat by the window, gazing toward Boston, sometimes sketching a sign in the dust across the sill, a serpent devouring its own tail encircling a dying lotus. And the Callahan sisters. After Finch's disgrace, they withdrew entirely from society. The great residence on Beacon Hill became an impenetrable keep. Marcus Callahan lived until 1899, a hermit within his estate, shielding his flawless, ageless daughters. At his passing, the will emerged as a chilling and unusual document. It transferred the full Callahan fortune into a charitable trust governed by a council of directors whose names formed a who's who of the Stygian Fellowship. The Testament's chief mandate was the eternal care of his afflicted children and Zalda and the pitiable Thomas, guaranteeing they would remain comfortable and untouched for the natural duration of their lives, a lifetime that for the sisters would never conclude. The mansion was to remain their private dwelling, forever sealed from the outside. They became Boston's most infamous phantoms, the girls who never aged, living apparitions trapped in a house no one could enter. Their tale became a neighborhood legend, a gothic fable whispered to terrify youngsters. The grim reality, of course, was sealed away with them, yet the engine demanded sustenance. The vanishings did not cease. They merely grew quieter, harder to trace, handled through the Fellowship's immense assets. The shriveled prince in the asylum still had to be nourished. The porcelain maidens in the estate still required their stolen bloom. If you have come this far, comment "The truth seeps through" below. You are beginning to grasp that certain legends are real. The conclusion of the tale, as the public believed, came in 1905. A colossal fire ignited in the boiler room consumed the Callahan estate within hours. The inferno raged so fiercely that the entire building collapsed into its foundation. Once the ashes cooled, inspect. Ores uncovered almost nothing. The official document declared Marcus Callahan's two daughters, Elara and Isolde, perished in the fire. Because of the extreme heat, their remains were unrecoverable. It was a neat, polished ending, a sorrowful yet believable conclusion to a bizarre family saga. But Finch's journal reveals another account. He predicted this. In one passage composed during his frantic final days of liberty, he speculated about the Fellowship's ultimate plan. "They cannot allow the sisters to be exposed," he wrote. As medical knowledge progresses, their condition would ignite an uncontrollable fascination. A single drop of blood beneath a modern microscope would unveil everything. The stasis belongs to an age long past. They will not risk discovery. They will not heal them. They will erase them. They will torch the evidence. They will label it a calamity. The blaze was no accident. It was a purging, a final, ruthless act of erasure. The Stygian Fellowship was cutting ties to its most prominent, most perilous secret. They were safeguarding their conspiracy for the future, yet one detail from the blaze never aligned, a fact whispered among the firefighters for decades. They uncovered no corpses, not even bone shards, not a sliver of flesh, nothing. It was as though the sisters had simply vanished. The Fellowship's justification was the overwhelming flames, but veteran fire marshals understood otherwise. Even in the worst infernos, fragments always remain. The hushed tale suggested the sisters were extracted before the fire was sparked, that the Fellowship, armed with occult science, discovered a new means to handle their assets, that Elara and Isolde were not destroyed but merely transferred, stored away, waiting for the moment their secret might be reborn. This is the moment where the tale plunges from history into a breathing nightmare, because if they were not destroyed, where were they taken? This enigma tormented the handful who knew fragments of the truth. What can you do with two perfectly preserved 17-year-old girls who in reality were nearly 50? You cannot release them. You cannot end them in any ordinary manner. You must conceal them. Following the blaze, the Stygian Fellowship began to transform. They shed their 19th century occult masks and evolved into something colder, sharper, and modern. They became a foundation, a charitable trust, a biomedical research body. They shifted their power and fortunes away from Boston's gaslit parlors into sterile boardrooms and laboratories of the 20th century. Their names appear on universities, clinics, endowments. They became the quiet, hidden architects of tomorrow, and their central pursuit, conquering age and decay, did not cease. It merely burrowed deeper into secrecy. Finch's diary grants the most horrifying clue. He uncovered from a manuscript he cited a note in the Somnis Infinitum that the stasis phenomenon could be magnified. It could be rendered dormant. The subject could be cast into a suspension so profound that they appeared deceased under all but the rarest scrutiny. A condition termed the cold lunar. The manuscript described a rite involving special chemical mixtures and resonant vibrations that could trigger this state. It also explained how it might be undone. It was a biological off-switch. My conclusion: the Fellowship never incinerated the sisters. They put them into slumber. They turned them off. They might rest anywhere. in the ward of a secluded clinic, in a cryovault within a laboratory, hidden in plain view, two flawless porcelain effigies awaiting their masters to wake them again. The inferno was nothing more than theatrical camouflage. The real terror is that the Callahan sisters might still be alive, their strange, unnatural youth preserved in a hidden state of slumber, a living monument to a force that has concealed itself from the world, a force that has only grown stronger, more refined, and is still working today beneath the surface of our reality. They are the ultimate hidden weapon, the ultimate proof of concept, and the men who command them are no longer just Boston businessmen. They are the unseen rulers of the modern world. Period. Now we must speak about the fuel, Thomas, the withered air. The blaze at the Callahan estate was a public show, but a quiet, overlooked incident occurred the very next day. The Brookline Asylum for the chronically afflicted suffered its own far smaller fire. A minor electrical spark limited to a single patient's room in a remote ward. The patient, an unidentified man who had been there for decades, perished from smoke inhalation. His files were destroyed in the fire. His remains were cremated before any family could be informed. Another neat, clean ending. Dr. Silas Croft, the asylum's administrator, retired with a rich pension and moved to a private island in the Caribbean. The fellowship was erasing traces. They were cutting every tie to their 19th century roots. Thomas, the driving force of the whole design, was no longer required. The sisters were dormant. The science had probably advanced. They no longer required a single shriveled vessel. Perhaps they had discovered a more efficient way to extract the bloom. Perhaps the chain of vanishings expanded into a worldwide industrial-scale operation. Consider this. The 20th century was filled with turmoil, wars, hunger, genocides, endless chances for a quiet, methodical group to drain human vitality on a massive scale, completely unnoticed among the greater disasters. The fellowship's methods changed with the age. They moved from seizing vagrants off the streets of Boston to steering global affairs. A chilling thought from one of Finch's more speculative notes. What if war is not the failure of peace talks, but a successful harvest? What if the turmoil that terrifies us is the ecosystem that feeds them? This is the true scale of the plot Finch uncovered. It wasn't just about two young wumps. It was about a concealed system of control that feeds on human existence, a system that has woven itself into the fabric of our past. A vial of liquid Finch stole from Thomas's quarters. I had it tested. I used a contact at a private cutting-edge genetics lab, saying it was a find from an anonymous archaeological dig. The outcome was inconclusive and horrifying. The chief researcher phoned me, his voice shaking. He said, "The material broke every known biological law. It contained human mitochondrial DNA, but it was formed in a way that was thought to be impossible. He said it seemed like a liquid form of pure cellular energy showing quantum behavior. He could not explain it. He begged me to reveal where it was found. I said I could not. 2 days later, his lab suffered a catastrophic server meltdown. All the research from the study vanished. All his backups were ruined. He was placed on indefinite suspension. They know I still have it, and they are still covering their tracks. You must grasp the mindset of these men, the members of the Stygian Fellowship. They do not view themselves as wicked. They see themselves as explorers, as redeemers. They are convinced that mankind, with its flaws, its rot, its mortality, is a defective creation. They believe they are perfecting it. They are the gardeners, and we are the weeds, or at times the treasured orchids to be saved. In their outlook, sacrificing a few or even millions for the goal of achieving ultimate dominion over life and death is not an offense. It is a noble, essential step of evolution. They are post-human. They have lifted themselves beyond the common moral code. Finch understood this. He wrote, "To argue with them about right and wrong is like arguing with a surgeon about the holiness of the flesh he cuts. They see only the design, the device. They have lost the ability to see the spirit within the machine, and so their strength comes not only from their wealth but from their secrecy and their patience. They think in terms of centuries, not decades. They have built a dynasty of wisdom, passed from one generation to the next. The offspring of the founding members are now the elder leaders of our age. They sit on the boards of international companies, they bankroll political races, they shape opinion through media empires. You have surely seen their faces on television, read their names in financial pages. You admire their success, their endurance, their seemingly ageless vitality. You credit it to fine genetics, healthy living, costly medicine. You do not see the dark machinery working behind the curtain. You do not see the cost that was paid and is still being paid for their blessings. The Callahan sisters were their first true achievement, a prototype. How many more have existed since? How many powerful figures in our society who seem untouched by the decay of age are participants in this program? What if the essence of their power is not only wealth? What if it is time itself? What if they have mastered the craft of stealing it from others? This is the essence of the forbidden truth. The world is not ruled by the leaders you imagine. It is ruled by a silent few who have conquered the one thing the rest of us cannot avoid: death. Now let us speak of the servant Clara. She was the one who told Finch about the unblinking figure. Her account was the first break in the mask. After meeting Finch, she vanished. Her family was told she had taken new employment with a wealthy household in England and would be away for many years. She was never seen again. But Finch, in his precise way, kept searching. He found that the wealthy family in England was an invention. The ticket she had supposedly bought was for a vessel that never existed. She was another loose thread, neatly tied and removed. But Clara was wise. She was terrified of Marcus Callahan and his allies. She left something behind, a safeguard. She wrote a long, detailed letter, a full admission of everything she had witnessed and suspected, and entrusted it to her priest with instructions it should only be opened if she went missing. The priest, an upright man named Father Michael, was horrified. When Clara disappeared, he went to the authorities. He submitted the letter. A case was opened and then swiftly closed. Father Michael was approached by two well-dressed strangers who spoke to him about the reputational harm such a wild story could cause the church and him personally. They mentioned the orphanage the church operated and how its funding relied on the generosity of particular donors. The warning was obvious. The letter disappeared from the police evidence room. Father Michael was reassigned to an isolated parish in the distant west where he passed away a few years later from a sudden sickness. The system shielded itself. It was flawless. Yet they overlooked one thing. Before Father Michael was moved, he carried out something remarkably courageous. He made a duplicate of Clara's letter and concealed it. He placed it in the back of the oldest Bible in his remote new church, and there it remained for more than a century, a forgotten testimony, a phantom's cry in the wilderness. It surfaced in 2019 when the church was shut down. The letter, in Clara's desperate looping handwriting, verifies every element of Finch's investigation, yet it introduces one more chilling fact. She witnessed what was inside the iron chest the unblinking man delivered to the house. She peeked through the study's keyhole. It was not medical devices, it was a small, decorated cage, and inside rested a bird. A nightingale, she wrote, that sang a tune which made the glass vibrate. A nightingale. The detail feels poetic, nearly absurd, yet it matches with the esoteric, pseudo-scientific nature of the fellowship. The stasis infinitum speaks of applying resonant frequencies and auditory trigger as to activate the suspension process. It explains that a precise harmonic vibration is required to lock the cellular framework in place. What if the nightingale was not merely a bird? What if what she saw was the key? A distinctive biological sound that served as the final switch in the procedure. A living instrument. Clara wrote that after the bird sang, a fine, shimmering dust filled the chamber, and the sisters who were lying on couches seemed to drift into a sleep deeper than death. When they awoke, they were transformed. This detail reveals a new, terrifying path. The fellowship's method was not only chemical or mechanical, it was bioacoustic. It relied on exploiting the singular properties of living creatures, twisting them to their purpose. And it suggests that their system was far more delicate and harder to notice than Finch ever believed. You would not need a huge humming machine. If the catalyst was as fleeting and simple as a sound, the process could occur anywhere. The technology might be portable. The iron chest, it could be an entire kit. Consider the implications. What other natural forces have they weaponized? What other mysteries of biology have they bent into tools of dominance? We view the world through the lens of modern science, a science they have carefully guided and funded. What if an entire other branch of physics, of biology, has been kept for themselves? A shadow science that runs parallel to ours, a science working on principles we would dismiss as magic or fantasy. The Nightingale is a hint that the reality we occupy is only a fragment of the full truth. It shows us that the deepest mysteries are not locked in vaults or servers. They are hidden in plain view, in the song of a bird, in the resonance of a crystal, in the biology we assume we understand. And that is why they hold such power, because we do not even know what to seek. We do not even know the proper questions to pose. Let us turn back to the sisters themselves. Ara and Isolde, what was their experience? We have Finch's notes, Clara's testim. But what was their inner reality? Finch believed their awareness was looping, trapped in cycles of old recollections. But what if it was far worse? What if they were conscious? Aware of time's flow, of the world evolving around them while they stayed helplessly, horribly frozen. Imagine seeing your friends grow old and die, watching the world you knew transform into something alien with new inventions, new customs, unfamiliar faces everywhere, all while you remain locked in the body and mind of a 17-year-old. It would not be a gift. It would be the most exquisite torture ever created. A silent, solitary hell. A disturbing real-world quote arises from philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. There are no beautiful surfaces without a terrible depth. The calm, radiant beauty of the Callahan sisters was the surface. The dreadful depth was a conscious, screaming soul trapped within. There is a hint of this in Finch's journal. In his final, desperate bid to comprehend, he sought out a medium, a famous spiritualist in Boston, Madame Eva. He was a man of science who despised what he considered cheap theatrics, yet he was desperate. He carried the locket he had taken from Thomas's chamber. Madame Eva fell into a trance. She did not summon the spirits of the dead. She summoned something else. She started speaking in two voices, overlapping, one sharp and furious, the other soft and sorrowful. Hilara and Isolde. The transcript Finch recorded is broken, nearly incoherent, but some phrases are clear. The clock is a liar. A painted face. The song pinned us down. Father made a mirror. And we are trapped behind the glass. So much noise. The world is so loud now. He is so hungry. The boy in the dark room is so hungry. And then the most chilling words of all, spoken in a single unified desperate whisper. Let us break. Please, let us break. They longed to die. They begged for the murk. Eye of decay, of aging, of death. The gift their father bestowed was their damnation, and they were painfully aware of each second of it. This truth changes everything. They were not passive dolls. They were conscious captives. Ara's note to Finch, her whispered, "He watches," was not just a warning. It was a daring risk, a desperate effort to reach the outside world. And the sketch she gave him, the serpent and the lotus, it was not just a sign she had seen. It was a diagnosis. She recognized in some way the nature of her condition. She was attempting to show him the mechanism of her prison. This reshapes the sisters in a new light. They were not simply victims, they were resistors in the only way possible, silent, subtle saboteurs of their own gilded cell. This thought is reinforced by another of Clara's accounts from her hidden letter. She wrote that in the years following their change, the sisters developed a secret language, a pattern of quiet signals, hand gestures, and exchanged glances. They would hold entire dialogues without uttering a sound, particularly when their father or fellowship members were near. Clara assumed it was a sisterly habit. But what if it meant more? What if they were plotting, strategizing, trading knowledge, keeping their own thoughts sharp against the creeping eternal stasis? What if they were searching for a way to break the enchantment? This implies that the stasis was not flawless. It carried imperfections. It could be resisted. Human determination, the conscious spirit, could push back against the biological cage. Maybe the repeating awareness Finch witnessed wasn't truly a feature of the stasis, but a protective mechanism the sisters devised, a method to anchor their thoughts, to stop themselves from dissolving into the endless nothing. Today, they weren't only waiting for salvation, they were attempting to engineer it. Ablaze in 1905. We believe the Fellowship ignited it to erase them. But what if that assumption is false? What if the sisters themselves caused it? What if it was their last desperate strike of defiance, a way to demolish the mansion, to erase themselves, and maybe to annihilate the device that chained them to this reality? It's a horrifying possibility that their only escape was self-immolation, yet it's also a tale of astonishing, sorrowful bravery. A final rejection hurled into the face of a power that had tried to strip away their very essence. If the sisters lit the fire, it alters the whole narrative. It means they weren't mere pawns, they were competitors. But it also unleashes a dreadful question. Did it succeed? Did they manage to obliterate themselves? Or did the Fellowship intrude, pulling them from their suicide attempt and thrusting them back into the frozen Luna against their will? The proof is uncertain. A lack of remains can uphold either conclusion, but there exists one additional element from the unpublished writings of the fire marshal who examined the site. A man named Captain Whit. He was a sincere, meticulous investigator, and he was profoundly disturbed by the case. His formal report was neat, precise, but his private notes, which his grandson later donated to an archive, reveal a different account. Wheat uncovered something inside the ruins of the conservatory, the single place where Allah felt comfort. It was the deformed, melted fragments of a tiny iron cage, the nightingale's cage. Yet inside he discovered something that had no business being there. The scorched but still recognizable remains of a sophisticated clockwork device. A timer, and it was fastened to what looked like a chemical ignition system. It was a bomb, an incendiary construct made to unleash a fire of overwhelming force. Hit understood its meaning. He knew the blaze was intentional. He brought the evidence to his leaders. They told him, without any doubt, to leave it. They insisted the case was finished. They reminded him he had dependents, a pension to protect. He yired, but preserved the notes. He knew the reality. The sisters had attempted to burn their confinement down. This wasn't simple suicide. It was offensive. They weren't merely seeking liberation. They aimed to ruin the Fellowship's work, to incinerate the secret of their very being. They intended to take their enemies with them. This act of rebellion, this ultimate fiery uprising, is their genuine legacy, not their eternal beauty, but their frantic, violent effort to seize back their mortality, and it renders the chance of their survival even more heartbreaking. To have battled with such ferocity, to have come so near, only to be reclaimed and locked into sleep by the very creatures they tried to annihilate. So what are we left with? A story absent of a clean conclusion, a conspiracy that has transformed beyond recognition, and two sisters who may or may not be lying dormant in a hidden chamber somewhere, awaiting the rise of a new age. The Stygian Fellowship in its current form is stronger than ever. They've absorbed their lessons, their strategies are subtler, their grip is more complete. They're no longer just a circle of Boston Brahmins. They've become a worldwide, unseen structure. They exist in the algorithms that mold your perception. They live in the chemical recipes of the medicine you consume. They exist in the silent vibration of satellites tracking you from the heavens. They've refined the craft of vanishing in clear sight. And the inventions taken from Lenora's stolen brilliance, combined with the blood of the withered prince, have likely developed to a level we cannot begin to fathom. Maybe they no longer depend on stasis. Maybe they've reached genuine renewal, genuine immortality, the capacity to reverse aging, to erase any illness. A strength they reserve for themselves and a select few they consider deserving, the highest form of control. Think about the people who truly command the globe, those who never appear to lose, who seem to operate with foresight and authority nearly beyond human limit. Yes, we label them geniuses, titans, visionaries. But what if they're merely ancient, incredibly ancient? What if they are the Fellowship's originals, their lifespans prolonged by a century of stolen vitality, still competing in the grand contest with the wisdom and mercilessness of eras? It's a horrifying vision that we inhabit a world quietly ruled by 19th-century robber barons who discovered the ultimate cheat code. The Callahan sisters were the linchpin to it all. Their suffering was the groundwork for this modern empire of shadows, and their tale, buried for ages, is not simply a ghost story. It is a caution. It is a chart outlining the prison we all inhabit without even perceiving it. You're not meant to know this, but some truths refuse to remain hidden. The writings of Dr. Alistair Finch are my foundation. Clara's letter is my corroboration. But the last fragment of this puzzle emerged from somewhere I never foresaw. The locket, the one Finch took from Thomas's quarters, the one with the portrait of Lara, the slain inventor. I devoted months attempting to trace her living descendants. It was nearly impossible. Her bloodline had been systematically erased from archives, but at last I located one, a great-great-grandniece leading a quiet existence as a librarian in Vermont. I visited her. I displayed the locket. She had never laid eyes on it before, but she knew the face. It was her great-great-grandmother, Lenora, and she recounted a tale passed down through the women of her lineage, a hushed secret. They said Lenora was not solely an inventor, she was also a parent. She had a son, an extraordinary, radiant boy, yet the boy bore a secret, a defect, a rare genetic disorder that caused his body to deteriorate at a terrifyingly rapid rate, a condition that aged him into an old man by his teenage years. Lenora's experiments, her consuming labor on cellular wasn't for acclaim or for humanity. It was for him. She sought to preserve her child. And the boy's name, Thomas, the withered prince, wasn't Marcus Callahan's offspring. He was Lenora's. Callahan didn't only take her discoveries, he stole her child. He claimed the boy, her only reason to live, and twisted her research, her remedy, into a curse. He used her son as the engine to sustain his daughter's stasis. This is the original crime, the primal sin on which the entire fellowship was formed. It wasn't merely theft and killing, it was the violation of a mother's love. Callahan took the salvation she was shaping for her dying son and twisted it to transform his healthy daughters into eternal, lifeless relics. It is an evil so deep, so personal, it almost escapes understanding. The tale isn't merely about a stolen life, it's about stolen affection, stolen motherhood, a stolen future. And it makes the silent suffering of Tony's, the withered prince, even more tragic. He wasn't just a casualty, he was the deceived and abandoned child of the very genius whose creations were turned into tools of torture against him. This ultimate revelation reframes everything. Marcus Callahan's choices were not born of a grieving father's sorrow, they were born of a vile, possessive envy. He craved Lenora's brilliance. He coveted her son, a child brighter than his own. When he couldn't claim her, he seized everything she had, reshaping it into a shrine to his own pride. The Callahan sisters were left behind as trophies, evidence that Marcus Callahan could bend time itself using the instruments of the woman who rejected him. The Stygian Fellowship was no brotherhood, no gathering of grieving fathers. It was a league of entitled predators who believed their wealth gave them ownership over all things and all people. They were the supreme patriarchs, willing to trade the lives of their children and the children of others to preserve their grip on control. They did not dread loss. They dreaded irrelevance. They dreaded the natural cycle where the old must give way to the young. Their ambition was to shatter that rhythm, to create an eternal frozen world with them seated at the top. A reality where daughters never left their side, where their authority never weakened. It is the peak expression of despotic narcissism. And it is a pattern we witness time and again across history. Men with power striving to halt the march of time, striving to control the uncontrollable, scattering broken lives in their path. The saga of the Callahan sisters is not an isolated oddity. It is the sharpest reflection of an age-old human shadow. A shadow that wears the disguise of progress, of affection, of guardianship, but at its core it is nothing more than a panicked, voracious ego devouring the world to soothe its own dread of the end. This was the truth Finch uncovered, the very truth that drove him into what the world branded as madness. He realized the greatest monsters are never from myths. They are men who convince themselves their desires outweigh the lives of others, men who would set the world ablaze just to see their own reflection in its ashes. And now you must ask, why this story, and why this moment? The journal of Dr. Finch, Clara's letter, the fire marshal's notes. These fragments have been scattered for more than a century. Why do they surface now, all at once? I believe it's because the system is fracturing. The Fellowship, despite its vast reach and careful planning, is not invincible. 100 years of secrecy is a crushing burden. And modern technologies, the very ones they helped pioneer, are becoming their undoing. DNA tracing, global information webs, the digital fingerprints of every message and exchange. The world is growing unmanageable. Secrets are no longer safe. Maybe a faction within the Fellowship itself is leaking truth. A younger bloodline repulsed by the crimes of their fathers, trying to tear open the rot from within. Or maybe it is something else entirely. Maybe the stasis technology itself is unraveling. Maybe the porcelain dolls are cracking under their own weight. The energy preserving them cannot hold forever. The laws of nature, the real laws, can bend but never break forever. Entropy always wins. The universe always demands its toll. There's a principle in physics called quantum entanglement. Two particles joined in a mysterious bond, so that what affects one instantly echoes in the other. What if the bloom, the life force, follows the same rule? What if every soul consumed by the Fellowship across decades is still intertwined, a massive unseen web of stolen lives? And what if that network has begun to resist? What if the dead are rising, not in ghostly myth but in quantum force? What if the truth is not just being discovered, but is forcing itself into our world? The tale of the Callahan sisters is not only a warning from yesterday, it may be a signal of an approaching reckoning, one brewing unseen for more than 150 years. I must believe Finch's struggle was not wasted, that Clara's bravery, Father Michael's faith, Captain Whit's honor, that these sparks of defiance carried weight, that they sheltered a flicker of truth handed down across the darkened decades like a fragile ember. Now that ember rests in your hands. You, yes, you watching this, are the next keeper of the chain. This knowledge is dangerous. It alters how you perceive the world. You'll begin to recognize the patterns. You'll spot figures who seem untouched by time. You'll question the polished tales of history. You'll see the Fellowship's hand steering the hidden currents of power shaping our lives. They'll try to smother it. They'll label it a conspiracy, a myth. They'll marshal their endless influence to bury it again. They'll try to make you believe the world is simple, that powerful men are just lucky, that history is nothing more than chance. But you'll know beyond. Hedda, you'll remember the house on Beacon Hill. You'll remember the withered prince in his asylum cell. You'll remember Lenora, the slain genius, and her stolen child. You'll remember Elara and Isolde, the sisters trapped in the glass of time. This truth now belongs to you, and with it, a choice. You can ignore it, bury it, and return to the safe dream they built for you. Or you can stay alert, you can watch, you can speak, you can share the flame. Because the only terror that shadows fear is light. They can erase archives. They can silence witnesses. They can burn homes to ash. But they cannot uproot a truth once it has found soil in millions of minds. They are mighty, but they are few. We, on the other hand, are many. And yet one last fragment lingers, a loose thread haunting me from the first page of Finch's journal. The Nachtigall, the living instrument whose song sealed the sisters in time. What became of it? The cage Captain Hewitt uncovered in the ruins was empty. Clara's letter claimed that after the ritual, the unblinking man retrieved the bird and vanished. He did not kill it. He placed it back in its carved cage and carried it away. But why? Why preserve the key? Why not destroy it forever? The Sens Infinitum whispers a chilling possibility. It claims the auditory trigger is unique, impossible to duplicate. Its harmonic signature forever tied to the original ritual. As the key locks, the text explains, so too may it unlock. The same melody that binds can also unfasten. The Fellowship preserved the Night Andale alive. For more than 100 years they must have sustained it, applying their warped science to prolong its existence, just as they did with the sisters. It was their safeguard, their restart lever, the single device that could break the stasis. Why would they require that? Maybe if the sisters' prison began to weaken, or maybe for a darker intention. Then, the ultimate piece of leverage, the promise of release used to guarantee the sisters' mental obedience, or maybe the most dreadful possibility of all, they kept it because they planned to use it. They planned to awaken the sisters. Why? Why at this moment? I can merely guess. Maybe their technology has developed so far that they can finally fix the flaws in the original stasis. Maybe they wish to analyze their earliest subjects to extract lessons from the 150-year-old trial. Or maybe they envision a new role for Allah and Isolde within the 21st century. Picture the power of unveiling two living, breathing 17-year-old girls from the 1870s to today's world. It would be the greatest revelation, the highest proof of their authority, a way to at last emerge from concealment and be exalted as gods. The return of the Callahan sisters may not signal the conclusion of the scheme. It could mark the start of its final open stage, the day they announce themselves to humanity. So the pursuit of truth ends not with closure but with suspension. A game of waiting. We wait for the Fellowship to reveal their next step, and I am convinced that step is imminent. The evidence I've uncovered, the tale I've shared, it is not merely a history recital. It is a direct threat to their secrecy, and they will counter. They always counter. I cannot predict what form that retaliation may assume. Possibly a refined storm of disinformation, possibly a targeted strike on the sources of this knowledge, on me. But I've taken measures as Finch once did. I've dispersed his journal, Clara's note, all of my findings to numerous trusted allies in several nations with instructions for their automatic disclosure should I face an early death or be labeled mad. I've absorbed the lessons of history. I will not allow this truth to be buried once again. But the strongest shield is not my own array of dead man triggers. It is you, your focus, your memory, your refusal to embrace comforting lies. Each time this story spread, each time another person learns of the Callahan sisters, the Fellowship's grasp on humanity loosens slightly. Their strength is planted in our blindness. Our strength is grounded in our shared awareness. This is the conflict. They have waged it in the dark for over 100 years, a hidden conflict for mastery of reality itself. And tonight, whether you realized it or not, you have been drafted as a soldier in that conflict. You have been handed a map of the battlefield and a glimpse at the enemy, an enemy concealed in plain vision, an enemy that shaped the world. You were born inside an enemy that assumes you are nothing more than fuel for their engine. But they are mistaken. The human spirit, the drive for truth, for fairness. It is a force of nature they never truly smothered, not in Lara, not in Finch, and not in the two sisters who set ablaze their own cell. I often think about the vial of shining liquid still in my possession, the sample of pure essence that Finch took from Thomas's chamber. It remains in a lead-shielded case in a secure, undisclosed place. It is the final physical trace of that era, the final tangible shard of the machine. At times I feel inclined to destroy it, to pour it into the soil and let it fade. It feels like a cursed relic, condensed with so much anguish and torment. But I cannot, because it is also something else. It is proof. It is the lone object their science cannot dismiss. It is the impossible artifact proving the impossible story is genuine, and it might be the key to reversing their craft. If Lenora's brilliance could be retraced from this sample, if her original kind purpose could be restored, perhaps a genuine cure could emerge. Not just for the sisters, but for the sickness of dominance and greed that birthed them. Perhaps the cure for the Fellowship lies in the very essence they created to preserve themselves. A poetic justice I believe Dr. Finch would have savored. This is my wish, that this tale will not only serve as a warning, but as a spark. That it will stir a new wave of seekers, of scientists, of truth speakers who will not be silenced, who will chase the trail Finch marked, who will dare pose the forbidden questions, and who will ultimately uncover the Stygian Fellowship before the light. The truth remains scattered, locked in archives, hidden in forgotten notes, encoded within corporate accounts. It is a puzzle of endless fragments. I have handed you the corner fragments. It is yours to complete the rest. Trace the patterns, question the timelines, track the wealth, and never ever assume history is settled. It is alive, it breathes, and it may be rewritten. The spirits of the past are whispering. It is time we began to listen. What does it mean to be timeless? We romanticize the concept. We see it as an ideal, eternal youth, unending beauty. Yet the story of the Callahan sisters reveals the truth. To be timeless is to be lifeless. Life is motion. Life is shift. Life is birth and ruin. It is the constant, chaotic, beautiful unfolding of becoming. To freeze that unfolding is to commit a deep violence against the essence of existence. It is to sculpt a statue, not a human. The Stygian Fellowship in their arrogance thought they had conquered death, but they had not. They only invented a more polished, more dreadful version, a living death, a death of the soul caged inside a shell of fixed flesh. And in trying to govern life, they became the supreme heralds of death, devouring countless lives to sustain their illusion of eternity. They are the true withered royals. Their souls have been rotting for 150 years. Even while their reach expands, this is the final contradiction of their might. To cling to everything, they were forced to lose themselves. They are the phantoms now, stalking the halls of influence, their humanity a remote memory traded for a cold, relentless hunger for control. And the sisters, whether still dreaming in a vault or reduced to cinders, they stand as the ultimate casualty of that hunger. They are a symbol of all the wonder, all the promise, all the vitality surrendered at the altar of dominance. Theirs is not merely a tale from yesterday. It is the chronicle of our world written in the tone of Gothic horror. It is the story of what we surrender individually and collectively when we allow a small, fearful few to dictate the terms of our lives. It is the hidden foundation of our entire order. But secrets always reach an end, and this one expired long ago. The truth leaks through, impossible to hold back. At its core, this tale is a decision. You may accept it as real, or you may reject it. You may see only a knot of facts, rumors, and speculation, or you may see a crack in the hidden gears of the world. But think on this. If such power truly existed, power to halt time, erase lives, control history, wouldn't our world look exactly like this? A place of unexplained inequality, dynasties that never fall, deceptions stretching for generations, an official version of events that never quite adds up. Perhaps the greatest trick the Fellowship ever achieved wasn't convincing us they weren't real, but persuading us this distorted, manipulated reality is all that's possible, that this is simply the way things are. They normalized their own monstrosity. They made their cage our world. Dr. Finch died, thinking he had failed. He died alone in an asylum, disgraced, his work buried. He never knew if his journal would surface. He never knew if truth would ever breathe daylight, but still, he acted, he resisted, he recorded everything in hope someone someday would listen. Tonight we have listened. We bore witness to his bravery. We heard Clara's whispers, Ara and Isolde's pleas, Thomas's silent cry. We honored Lenora's memory. We tugged on a dark thread from the fabric of lies and saw it woven through everything. This knowledge does not soothe, it grants terrible clarity. It weighs heavy, but it is also a weapon. Light the darkness cannot withstand. Use it wisely. My search is far from finished. It has only begun. Finch's journal names others, other families tied to the Stygian Fellowship. Their reach stretches well beyond Boston. Their roots spread through New York, London, and corridors of power worldwide. The Callahan sisters' story is only the opening chapter. There are further experiments, further victims, more secrets buried deep. I will follow these trails. I will dig. I will not stop until the entire rotten structure lies exposed. But I cannot do this alone. One voice is too small. This demands a collective effort, a fellowship of seekers who look beyond the veil. This is my call to you. Do not remain passive. Investigate. Explore your own histories. Seek the powerful families with no clear origin. Trace the strange coincidences, the untimely deaths, the missing records. The Fellowship wasn't confined to Boston. They built branches. They had allies. The pattern is there if you know how to see it. The serpent and lotus may appear in the most unexpected corners. An old stone, a corporate logo, a church window's glass. These are their signatures. Quiet claims of dominion. They believe they own the past. They believe they own the future. It is time to prove them wrong. It is time to reclaim our story. Truth is dangerous, but it is also the only force that frees. This tale is my first gift. More will come. The ghosts of the past now speak, and they will not be hushed. Change is coming. Dot. So what remains? A grim tale from a forgotten sliver of American history. But it is more than that, isn't it? You feel it, that chill of recognition in your gut, that sense that this story in some strange way is real. Not every name, not every detail, but the heart of it. A hidden force, secret knowledge, a system working just beyond our sight. This is truth that resonates on a primal level. We have always suspected the world is not what it seems. We have always felt unseen strings tugging. The story of the Callahan sisters gives a name and a face to that suspicion. It provides a frame to grasp the senseless, and that makes it powerful. It confirms a suspicion haunting humanity for millennia, that we are not alone at the top of the chain. Predators walk among us. They look like us, yet play by other rules with different hungers. They do not feed on flesh, but on time, on energy, on the future itself. This story does not aim to frighten you, it aims to enrage you. A just anger, the fury of the deceived, the exploited. Anger that can be forged into vigilance, into action, into demand for truth. Yes, the world is dark and tangled, but it is not hopeless. One candle's light can scatter a great darkness. Finch was a candle, Clara was a candle, and now you are a candle. Together we can spark a blaze that cannot be put out. The story is no longer mine alone. It is now yours. The last chilling thought is this. The Fellowship's deepest secret may not be their stasis technology at all. It may be what they discovered from it. For a century and a half, they sat front row watching the slow, suspended consciousness of the Callahan sisters. They studied them, monitored them. What insights did they extract from two trapped minds? They learned memory's workings, how personality is formed, how the human spirit can be confined, directed, even reprogrammed. They built a laboratory for perfecting psychological control. Mastery over the body was step one. The true prize was dominion over the mind. And that prize, I believe, they secured. That is why our world feels fractured, divided, why we are so easily provoked, so easily enraged, so easily turned against each other. We live inside their greatest experiment. The lessons gleaned from the two girls in the house on Beacon Hill now stretch across the globe. They keep us in stunted growth, trapped in loops of distraction and outrage. They sing us into paralysis with a new electronic nightingale song. The tale of Ara and Isolde is not just a historical tragedy, it is a model for our present. Their silent, timeless cage has been widened to hold us all. No, you know.